The reception hall glittered like a promise. Anastasia stood beside Abraham, fingers laced with his beneath the bridal table, as distant relatives took turns offering prayers, jokes, and thinly veiled advice. She smiled until her jaw ached, repeating "thank you," as if the words themselves could secure her place in the Oscar family. "Breathe," Abraham whispered, thumb tracing a steady circle on her palm. Across the room, Rosalie's eyes measured the lace of Anastasia's gown before sliding to the shoes, modest, sensible, then back up with a cool smile. Oscar, the patriarch, sat tall, his gray hair a crown he had placed on himself, his gaze unblinking. When he rose to speak, the room fell into the hush that power demands. "Marriage," he intoned, "is duty. A house must never be silent, a name must not end." Applause swelled, then faded. Anastasia felt the weight of those words settle on her chest. Later, on the balcony, she pressed her head to Abraham's shoulder. "Will they ever see me?" she asked. He kissed her hair. "I see you," he said, "and I will not let anyone turn our love into a courtroom." She believed him. Tonight, hope felt near enough to touch. The first nights in their new home carried the quiet rhythm of beginnings. 2 cups on the counter, a shared towel hook, a light left on for the other returning late. Abraham brought flowers from a roadside vendor, sun-warmed petals wrapped in old newspaper, and laughed when Anastasia replaced the paper with a glass vase. "We're building our own ways," he said. She cooked the stew his mother used to make, imprecise but earnest. He swallowed and declared it perfect. On Sundays they visited Oscar's estate, where the lawn stretched like a green declaration and the walls kept secrets their owners called tradition. "You will learn," Rosalie said mildly when Anastasia arranged the cutlery incorrectly. "In this family, everything has a place." The sentence was not unkind, but it pricked. After guests left, Oscar clasped Abraham's shoulder and eyed Anastasia as one would an investment. The future waits for no one. On the drive home, night pressed warm against the windows. "We'll move at our pace," Abraham murmured. Anastasia nodded, folding the sentence into her heart like a vow. She told herself beginnings are supposed to be tender and awkward. The earth must be broken before anything grows. It began with glances that hovered a breath too long. Rosalie arrived one afternoon with a silk scarf as a welcome to the family gift, draping it around Anastasia's neck with an elegant flourish, then adjusting it once, twice, as if to correct something more than fabric. "You wear soft colors," Rosalie observed. "In our circles, bolder tones speak better." Brianna, Abel's wife, chimed in from the couch, legs crossed, nails gleaming. "She has a gentle face," she said, "but gentle doesn't win rooms." Anastasia laughed politely, fingers on the scarf, mind racing to fix an error she could not name. In the kitchen, she whispered to Abraham, "Did I embarrass them?" He shook his head, leaning in. "You were gracious." When they returned, Brianna was scrolling through photos on her phone. "See," she said, waving a picture from a gala. "Posture is everything. Head high. Chin forward." Rosalie's smile sharpened. "And confidence is easiest when you have outcomes." The words sat on the coffee table between them like a glass about to fall. Anastasia inhaled, anchored by Abraham's quiet squeeze to her hand. His subtle critiques multiplied in small ways that felt enormous. Rosalie corrected how Anastasia greeted elders. "Both hands, dear, with your head a little lower," and how she poured water. "Tilt the jug, not the glass." Brianna's compliments came with invisible hooks. "You're so calm, Anastasia," she would say, like someone who has no worries. When Abraham stepped away to answer a call, Brianna leaned closer. "Tell me, how are you planning to balance everything?" Her eyes drifted to Anastasia's midsection with practiced innocence. Anastasia steadied her breath. "With patience," she answered, "and with prayer." Rosalie rose to leave, the silk scarf slipping through her fingers as she adjusted it again. "Prayer is good," she said, "but a family also needs proof." After the door closed, Abraham found Anastasia staring at the scarf's sheen. "I think I'm failing a test no one explained," she confessed. He cupped her face. "They're o test," he said softly, though his eyes flickered toward the estate across town where his father had built rules into the bricks. At Sunday lunch, Oscar presided like a judge whose verdict was always already written. The dining room, with its polished wood and ancestral portraits, demanded smallness from anyone who entered. Anastasia offered to help the staff, but was told, kindly and firmly, that guests do not serve. Family, Oscar corrected. She is family. He waited a beat before adding, and a family's first fruit is children. Abel laughed too loudly. Rosalie sipped water, eyes steady on Anastasia. Abraham's fork scraped his plate. Daddy, he said, we're barely out of the ceremony. Give us time. Oscar dabbed his mouth with linen. Time is a resource, son, like money. Wise men do not waste it. The quiet that followed pressed against Anastasia's ribcage. She searched the table for neutral ground, weather, work, anything, but found only the thud of expectations. On the terrace after dessert, the city shimmered in the afternoon heat. Oscar waved Abraham over, then gestured for Anastasia to join. Do not misunderstand me, he began, voice almost gentle. A woman may be beautiful, respectful, skilled, but if her womb is silent, a house becomes a corridor haunted by footsteps that never run. Anastasia's mouth went dry. Abraham stepped forward. We will have children, he said, each word even. And if we do not, Oscar asked calmly, will you ask my name to disappear? The question hung in the sunlight like a blade. Anastasia swallowed, forcing steadiness. Sir, she said, I honor your legacy. But dignity is not only measured by grandchildren. Oscar's gaze cooled. It is in this one. He turned away, conversation closed. On the drive home, Abraham gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. He thinks love is a ledger, he muttered. Anastasia folded her hands in her lap and prayed for soil that would not choke the seed of her hope. Months began to slip by, each one a small hill Anastasia climbed with quiet determination. She learned the family calendar, birthdays that demanded flawless hosting, anniversaries that required speeches in the choreography of their gatherings. Laughter in the foyer, alliances in corners, judgment disguised as concern. In the kitchen after a Sunday service, two aunties whispered while Anastasia rinsed a bowl. She is polite, one said, and slim, the other replied. Too slim. Some bodies do not know how to invite children. When Anastasia turned, their smiles were butter smooth. My daughter, one cooed, eat more yams. She ate the yams. She ate the silence that followed. In bed that night, the ceiling fan hummed like a low prayer. Maybe I should see a doctor, she said. Abraham rolled toward her. We will, if you want. But you are not a problem to be solved. The calendar turned again. Another child was christened in the extended family. Another cake cut with silver knives that caught the light like triumphant trumpets. Anastasia held babies, breathed their milk-scent warmth, and handed them back with a smile that never cracked. In the bathroom, she pressed cool water to her eyes and whispered scripture into her palms. Those who sow in tears shall reap in joy. When she returned, Rosalie was instructing a cousin on centerpieces. Simplicity is fine, Rosalie said, but a table must carry abundance. She looked up, her gaze a quick inventory. You look tired, Anastasia. Are you, well? The words slid. Anastasia steadied. I am well, she said. Thank you. That night, Abraham found her in the living room, staring at the dark window where her reflection hovered, small. I'm still me, she said, voice trembling, but I feel like I'm shrinking. He drew her into his arms. Rest here, he whispered. Let the world be loud. We will be quiet and faithful. The evening of Brianna's second baby shower pulsed with curated joy. Gold balloons, a tower of cupcakes, a photographer moving like a shadow collecting smiles. Anastasia arrived with a quilt she had stitched by hand, tiny stars for tiny hands, and set it gently on the gift table. Brianna swept in wearing silk that announced her as a headline. Look at you, she cooed, tapping Anastasia's cheek. Still graceful. Some women gain weight before the baby, you know. Laughter rippled. Rosalie's brow lifted in a practiced arc later during games. Someone shouted, Advice for mothers. Brianna took the mic, eyes sparkling. The secret, she said, gaze sliding toward Anastasia, is to have a womb that cooperates. The room tittered. The joke was thin, but it cut like glass. Anastasia's smile held, then wavered. In the restroom, she locked the stall and let the ache spill into her hands. When she emerged, Abraham was waiting by the corridor, anger tight in his jaw. We can leave, he said. Now. She shook her head, swallowing. If we flee, their words will follow. Back in the hall, Brianna posed for photos, belly prominent, confidence louder than the music. Sister, Brianna called, voice honeyed. Did you see the stroller, limited edition? Some blessings come easily. Anastasia's throat burned. Rosalie slid beside Brianna with a smile too precise. Be kind, she murmured, not softly enough. Abraham stepped forward. Enough. His voice cut cleanly through chatter. We celebrate life, not mock those waiting for it. Silence settled. Brianna lifted her chin, then laughed lightly. Oh, we are all family, she said. Just teasing. On the drive home, Anastasia clutched the unclaimed quilt on her lap, threads damp where her fingers had pressed too hard. Abraham began to confront the voices that had always felt like background music. Over dinner at the estate, when Abel joked, "Brother, you need coaching," Abraham set his fork down with surgical precision. Say that again, and you'll eat your words, not the stew. Abel laughed, surprised, then rolled his eyes. Later, on the veranda, Abraham faced Oscar. I will not have my wife humiliated in my presence, he said, voice low but steady. Oscar studied him, the way men inspect a roof in Harmattan. You are emotional, the patriarch pronounced. A leader keeps his house in order. Abraham leaned forward. My house is in order. It's your tongue that is not. For a heartbeat, the night seemed to hold its breath. Oscar exhaled slowly. You will learn that legacy requires firmness. Abraham's laugh had no mirth. Maybe firmness should begin with respect. At home, he did what he could with what he had. He lit candles and cooked jollof that was slightly smoky. He ran baths and sat on the tiled floor while Anastasia soaked, telling her about a childhood memory where he had fallen from a mango tree and Oscar hadn't looked up from his newspaper. I will be different, he promised, fingers circling her wrist. I will choose you loudly. She smiled, fragile and brave. Choosing me might cost you, she warned. Let it, he replied. I will pay. At night he prayed beside her, voice rough with need. Lord, teach me to cover my wife. When sleep finally came, it was light and easily frightened. A knock on a neighbor's gate could scatter it. Still, in those thin hours, their hands found each other in the dark like a map back home. It happened after a tense Sunday when an aunt asked, for the third time in a row, whether Anastasia had tried a particular herbal mixture that worked wonders in our village. Back at the estate, Oscar called a family meeting in the library where the books were more decoration than counsel. He stood by the window, back rigid. I will speak plainly, he said. A barren woman brings a quiet that kills a house. Anastasia felt the floor tilt. Abraham stepped between them. Do not call my wife barren. Oscar's mouth thinned. What word should I use for a field that yields nothing? The room seemed to pulse. Rosalie looked down. Brianna watched, hunger sharpened by triumph. His sentence arrived with the certainty of a stamp on paper. She is a curse in this family. The air broke. Anastasia's breath left her body as if pushed. Abraham's voice cracked the silence. Take it back. Oscar did not blink. Truth is not an insult. Then hear mine, Abraham said, shaking. Your pride is the curse. He took Anastasia's hand and turned to leave. Rosalie raised a hand, then let it fall. In the corridor, Anastasia leaned against the wall, the world looping into a small, bright circle. I'm sorry, she whispered, as if she had done something wrong. No, Abraham said, cupping her face. No. They drove in silence, the road a ribbon of night. At home, Anastasia walked directly to the bedroom and sat at the edge of the bed, shoes still on. If I am a curse, she said finally, voice flat with shock, let me leave. Abraham knelt. You are my covenant, he replied, eyes wet. Not my calamity. We will not break because someone misnamed us. Grief became a routine with a schedule, dusk, then midnight, then dawn. Anastasia learned the weight of a house after words have shattered on its floor. She moved softly, careful not to cut her feet on unseen edges. In the bathroom, she ran the tap to mask her sobs. Abraham sat outside the door, forearms on knees, whispering prayers that sounded like apologies. I should have shielded you earlier, he said through the wood. You did, she answered, lying because she loved him. In bed, he wrapped around her like a wall against wind. I don't know how to fix what I cannot hold, he confessed. She turned, pressing her forehead to his. Then stay. That is fixing. They stayed awake, listening to the city's distant engines and the nearer sound of a clock that refused to hurry. Days they performed their lives. Abraham went to work, jaw set. Anastasia visited a clinic alone to ask questions about hope. She returned with pamphlets that spoke of timing and hormones and chances like weather forecasts, sunny intervals, scattered showers. At dinner, she slid the papers across the table. "Would you consider treatment?" she asked. Abraham read slowly, then looked at her. "Yes," he said. Relief rose hot and fierce, surprising her. "We will go quietly," he added. "It is our journey, not their spectacle." That night, lying in the dark, Anastasia tried out a prayer she had avoided, not for a child, but for the courage to walk whatever road came. "If it is long," she whispered, "walk with me." The ceiling fan clicked, steady as a metronome. In its rhythm, she heard the smallest echo of peace. Abel chose a Friday night, beer bottles sweating on the glass table, a football match murmuring on the television, to stage his counsel. "Brother," he said, leaning back, "weigh your options like a businessman. The market is telling you something." Abraham stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. "She is not a market," he replied. Abel shrugged. "Then call it legacy. Our name needs heirs. No one will blame you for taking a second wife. It's wisdom." Brianna, perched on the arm of the sofa, added lightly, "Some men manage these things discreetly. Peace for everyone." Abraham's laugh was short and sharp. "Peace for the one who gets what he wants. War for the woman who is traded like furniture." Brianna's smile cooled. "You are too sentimental," she said. "Strong men are not." When Anastasia arrived to pick him, she sensed the perfume of a conversation gone sour. In the car, Abraham told her everything. She listened, hands folded, then said quietly, "If you ever choose that road, tell me first. Do not become like them in secret." He reached for her hand. "Never." The next day, Oscar summoned Abraham. "Your brother is practical," he said, voice smooth. "A family head must prepare contingencies." Abraham stood. "My marriage is not a meeting agenda." Oscar's eyes hardened. "You mistake me for your equal." Abraham held his father's gaze, then inclined his head, not submission but farewell, and walked out. When he reached the car, he exhaled a breath that trembled. "We will leave," he said to Anastasia. "Not the city, just their orbit." She nodded, feeling the first clean gust of air on her face in months. Abraham booked the flights at midnight, the blue glow of the laptop tinting his determination. He researched clinics where hope was a craft honed by science and kindness. He wrote emails with careful questions. He checked their passports twice. In the morning he made tea and placed the mug in Anastasia's hands before she woke. "Love," he said, "we will travel. We will seek help, just you and me." Her eyes widened, then filled. "What will we tell them?" He smiled without joy. "That we are visiting suppliers. Business." She nodded slowly, relief and fear braided together. They packed light, more prayers than clothes, and left notes with the housekeeper about the garden. Abraham told no one else. On the way to the airport, they held hands in silence, listening to the city yawn awake. "I am scared," Anastasia admitted. "So am I," he said, "but fear will walk behind us, not ahead." The plane rose, and with it her heart a fraction. In the clinic's white corridors, they became students of patience. Blood tests, scans, consultations where doctors spoke gently and honestly. Pain arrived as scheduled and unscheduled, needles, procedures, the private humiliation of being measured for hope. Abraham kept vigil, counting breaths, reading psalms aloud, a steady rain on a tin roof. "If you need to stop, we stop," he told her after a particularly brutal day. "No," she whispered, fingers finding his. "We keep going until God says enough." Weeks turned into a map of small victories and setbacks. One evening, a specialist placed a cautious smile on the table between them. "There is a chance," she said. Anastasia closed her eyes, tears slipping free. Abraham's hand trembled over hers. "Then we will hold it," he replied. Outside, night settled gently over a foreign city, and for the first time in a long time, their future did not feel like a room with no doors. The night they left was clothed in secrecy, a silence that felt almost sacred. Abraham carried their suitcases into the taxi without asking for help, his movements deliberate, as though each action was a vow to protect his wife from the eyes that had grown too sharp in judging her. Anastasia sat quietly in the back seat, staring out of the window as the familiar streets blurred into shadows behind her. "Do you think they will suspect?" she asked in a whisper, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. Abraham reached across, covering her hand with his, and said firmly, "They will believe what I tell them. Business matters. This is our fight, and it belongs to no one else." The airport was unusually quiet, the rows of lights stretching like a path laid for them alone. As they sat waiting for boarding, Anastasia leaned against him and whispered, "What if it doesn't work?" Abraham turned his head, pressing his lips to her hair. "Then at least we will know we tried together. No matter what happens, you are enough for me." She closed her eyes, holding on to his words as tightly as her own prayers. When they landed, the air smelled different, sharper, as if every breath contained the possibility of new beginnings. The clinic was modern and clinical, yet in its stark walls, Anastasia found an odd comfort. No one there looked at her with pity or suspicion, only with professionalism and hope. The doctors welcomed them, outlining procedures and schedules with quiet assurance. Anastasia held the papers in her hands, the medical terms heavy and strange, but in Abraham's presence she felt less afraid. One evening, after their consultation, they sat on a bench outside the hospital, watching the sun sink behind the buildings. "I never imagined we'd have to fight like this," Anastasia murmured. Abraham squeezed her shoulder, his jaw tight. "Some wars are hidden from the world, but we fight them anyway. And when we win, no one will know the nights we bled for it." She looked at him then, and for the first time in months, hope did not feel like a stranger. The days inside the clinic unfolded with a rhythm that tested Anastasia's spirit. Each morning began with blood tests, needles slipping into her veins until her arms bore small bruises, quiet reminders of the war waged beneath her skin. Abraham was always beside her, his presence as steady as the ticking of the clock on the clinic wall. During one procedure, Anastasia clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. "It's too much, Abraham," she whispered, sweat forming on her forehead. He leaned close, gripping her hand until his knuckles whitened. "Breathe, Anna. Just breathe. I'm here. You're not alone." The doctor nodded approvingly at her resilience, but Anastasia knew it wasn't resilience. It was Abraham's voice pulling her back from despair. Each day bled into the next, and still the treatments continued, weaving pain and hope together like an unrelenting tapestry. At night, when the clinic corridors grew quiet, Anastasia often broke down in their small rented apartment. She would curl on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands, sobs shaking her frame. "Why is it so hard, Abraham?" she cried one evening, her voice raw. "Maybe I'm not meant for this. Maybe your father was right." Abraham knelt before her, lifting her chin until their eyes met. His own eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "Do not give his voice power over you," he said fiercely. "You are not a curse, Anastasia. You are my blessing. This pain will not be wasted." She inhaled shakily, clinging to his words as though they were lifelines thrown into stormy waters. In those moments, Abraham's faith was the shield that held them together. Each whispered prayer, each hand he held through her trembling, became the unseen rope that kept her from drowning. Months of endurance finally bore the smallest fruit, and that fruit felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Anastasia sat in the sterile room, the paper gown rustling as she fidgeted nervously. The doctor's smile was cautious yet kind as he handed over the test result. "Mrs. Oscar," he said softly, "there's good news. You're pregnant." The world seemed to freeze, the words hanging in the air longer than sound should. Anastasia gasped, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth, eyes welling with tears that burned hot and fast. She turned to Abraham, her voice breaking. "Did you hear that? We're going to have a baby." Abraham took the paper with shaking hands, his vision blurred by tears he did not try to hide. He pulled her into his arms, pressing his forehead to hers. "God has answered us," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "He has not forgotten us." They sat there for a long time, clinging to each other, their hearts beating in synchrony like two survivors washed ashore after a storm. Later that night, in their small apartment, Anastasia stared at her reflection in the mirror, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "So small," she murmured, "so fragile." Abraham stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "But mighty," he said firmly. "This is the beginning of our testimony." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "After all the names they called me, after all the nights of tears, this is God's answer." Abraham kissed her shoulder softly. "Let the world say what it will. From this moment, we walk in victory." The joy in their hearts was cautious, delicate, yet it was joy nonetheless, a flame that no mockery could snuff out. The flight back home carried both triumph and fear, for Anastasia and Abraham returned with a secret too precious to be shared too soon. As they stepped into their house, Anastasia inhaled the familiar air, pressing her palm gently to her stomach. "Should we tell them?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Abraham shook his head firmly, setting down the luggage. "Not yet. Let's guard this gift until it is ready to be revealed. Their mouths are too sharp, their words too heavy. I won't let them curse what God has blessed." Anastasia nodded, though her heart longed to shout the news from rooftops. She chose silence, trusting her husband's wisdom. They resumed their daily routines, attending gatherings with polite smiles while their secret grew quietly beneath her heart. In the evenings, Anastasia would sit by the window, sewing tiny baby clothes in muted colors. "You're already preparing," Abraham teased gently one night as he watched her stitching. "I can't help it," she replied with a shy smile. "It feels real when I make something for him." Or her. Abraham walked over, resting his hand on hers. "It is real, and soon the world will see what God has done." Their laughter was softer these days, their words careful, but their hearts brimmed with anticipation. Even in silence, their house felt fuller, as though joy had finally made a home within its walls. They lived in quiet victory, waiting for the day their miracle could no longer be hidden. Rosalie's eyes were always sharp, catching details others missed. One Sunday afternoon, during a family lunch, she tilted her head as Anastasia entered the dining room. "You look different," Rosalie said casually, though her eyes lingered a second too long on Anastasia's face and waistline. "Perhaps it's just the glow of travel," she added, her tone mild but probing. Brianna chuckled lightly. "Or maybe she's been eating better. Abraham has always spoiled her." Anastasia forced a polite smile, lowering herself into her chair carefully. Inside, her heart raced. Later, as plates were cleared, Rosalie whispered to Brianna, "I think she's hiding something. Her cheeks are fuller, but not like weight, something else." Brianna smirked, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. "If she's with child, she won't be able to keep it hidden for long." The gossip grew in corners, quiet words exchanged in kitchens and hallways, though Anastasia pretended not to notice. At home, she sighed heavily, dropping her head into her hands. "They see everything, Abraham. How long can I pretend?" Abraham drew her close, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "Let them wonder," he murmured. "Their words do not shape our truth. When the time comes, it will be God himself who silences them." She exhaled slowly, clinging to his reassurance. "I want to protect this baby from their eyes, from their mockery," she whispered. Abraham lifted her chin gently. "Then we will cover this child with love, Anna. Love stronger than gossip, stronger than suspicion." And though whispers swirled like smoke outside, inside their home, hope burned steady and strong. By the 5th month, Anastasia could no longer hide the gentle curve of her belly, no matter how loosely she tied her wrapper. One evening at Rosalie's house, as Anastasia reached for a plate, her gown shifted and the outline of her stomach revealed itself. Gasps filled the room. Rosalie stood, her hand pressed dramatically to her lips. "So it's true," she exclaimed. "All this time you've been hiding it from us." Brianna clapped her hands together, feigning delight. "Congratulations, sister. Why didn't you say anything sooner? We would have celebrated with you." Anastasia's face flushed, but Abraham stepped forward, his arm wrapping protectively around her. "We chose silence because this blessing is too precious for careless words," he said firmly. The room quieted, though glances darted like arrows across the table. After that day, everything changed. Suddenly, the same women who had mocked her brought gifts of fruit and vitamins, their smiles wide but insincere. Oscar himself spoke with a booming voice at dinner. "I knew it," he declared. "I told everyone my son's wife would give me a grandson. I never doubted." Anastasia lowered her gaze, her heart heavy with unspoken memories of his cruel words. At home, she sat by the bed, resting her hand over her belly. "They celebrate now, Abraham, but they forget the years I was shamed." Abraham knelt beside her, his hand covering hers. "Let them rewrite their history," he whispered. "We will remember the truth. This child will know the tears that were sown before his joy arrived." She nodded, her eyes brimming, knowing the season of hiding had ended. Soon after, their home became a revolving door of relatives bringing fruits, oils, and advice. Rosalie arrived with books on pregnancy, speaking as though she had been Anastasia's greatest supporter all along. "I prayed for you every night," she said, placing her hand dramatically over her heart. Brianna brought baby clothes and declared loudly, "I always knew you would prove yourself." I told everyone patience was the key. Anastasia accepted their offerings with polite smiles, but inside she remembered their whispers, the sharpness of their tongues when she had been most vulnerable. One afternoon after they left, she sat heavily on the couch and murmured, "Do they think I've forgotten?" Abraham placed his arm around her shoulders, his voice steady. "Their memory is selective, Anna, but yours is not. Keep your peace. It is not them you need to answer to." The pretense grew thicker with each passing week. At gatherings, relatives suddenly asked after Anastasia's health with exaggerated concern. "How are you feeling, dear?" An aunt crooned. "You must take it easy. We don't want anything to happen." The words stung, not because of their concern, but because of the years she had spent invisible. In the evenings, Anastasia released her frustration into Abraham's arms. "Their love feels like a performance," she whispered. He kissed her temple softly. "Let them perform. When the curtain falls, the truth remains, you were mocked, but God lifted you. That is the story they cannot erase." She exhaled slowly, realizing that even false concern could not undo the quiet strength she had built within. Their words no longer carried power. Her miracle was too real, too alive to be diminished. As the pregnancy advanced, Oscar's voice became the loudest in rewriting history. At a family dinner, he raised his glass and declared, "I always knew my son's wife would bring honor to this family. I told you all, patience would prove her worth." Laughter and applause followed, though Anastasia felt her chest tighten with bitterness. She glanced at Abraham, who shook his head subtly, urging her to remain silent. Later that evening, Oscar pulled Abraham aside, his tone smug. "This child is proof of your strength, my son. You have restored pride to our name." Abraham's jaw clenched. "Father," he said quietly, "this child is not about pride. It is about grace." But Oscar waved him off, basking in a glory that was not his. Anastasia watched him from across the room, her hands resting protectively on her belly. She whispered under her breath, "You called me a curse, yet now you boast as though you carried this child yourself." That night, back at home, she broke down in tears. "It's as if he never wounded me, as if those words were never spoken." Abraham pulled her close, stroking her back gently. "He may deny his cruelty, but God does not erase truth. In time, even he will face what he said. For now, we hold on to what is ours." Anastasia nodded slowly, wiping her tears. Though Oscar claimed victory before all, she knew the real triumph was hers, born out of nights of sorrow, whispered prayers, and relentless faith. The day arrived with a storm of pain that felt endless. Anastasia clutched Abraham's hand so tightly her nails dug into his skin as the hours dragged into night. Sweat soaked her brow, her body trembling with the weight of bringing forth life. "I can't," she cried, her voice breaking. "It's too much, Abraham. I can't do it." He leaned close, brushing damp hair from her face. "You can, Anna. You are stronger than you know. Hold on to me. Just breathe with me." The room pulsed with urgency as nurses moved quickly, voices low but firm. Each contraction felt like fire tearing through her body, yet she endured, her cries echoing against the sterile walls. After hours that felt like eternity, the cry of a baby finally pierced the air. Anastasia's tears flowed freely as the nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms. "Look, Anna," Abraham whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our miracle is here." Anastasia stared down at the small face, the delicate fingers curling instinctively around hers. "You were worth every tear," she whispered, kissing his forehead. Exhaustion weighed on her, but joy flooded through her veins like light. Abraham leaned over, his own tears falling freely. "Welcome, little one," he murmured. "You are the proof that God remembers." And in that moment, all the years of waiting, of mockery, of pain melted away, replaced with a love deeper than words. They named him Nathaniel, meaning gift of God, for no other name felt worthy of the journey that had brought him here. As Anastasia held him close, she whispered softly, "You are the answer to every prayer, my son. The world once called me empty, but God filled me with you." Abraham stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on both mother and child. "He is our testimony," Abraham said with quiet conviction. When relatives came to visit, they marveled at the baby, their smiles wide, their praises loud. "What a strong boy!" Rosalie exclaimed, as though she had never once mocked Anastasia's silence. Brianna cooed over him, declaring, "He has Abraham's eyes. A true heir." Anastasia nodded politely, but her heart remembered. At night, when the house grew quiet, Anastasia rocked Nathaniel gently in her arms, humming lullabies with tears glistening on her cheeks. "They once called me a curse," she whispered to him. "But you, my child, are the light God used to silence them." Abraham came to her side, watching the tender scene. "Anna, he will grow to know his story," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "Yes, but he will not carry the weight of their words. He will walk in freedom and grace." Abraham kissed her forehead, and together they watched their son sleep, the embodiment of victory after years of sorrow. In Nathaniel's gentle breaths, Anastasia found healing. The child she had been denied for so long had finally arrived, and with him, the promise that her days of shame had ended. The air in the Oscar household shifted the moment Nathaniel's presence filled it. Anastasia, once shunned and ignored at gatherings, now found herself ushered to the front row of family dinners, her chair pulled out for her as if she were royalty. Rosalie, who had once dismissed her as an outsider, now embraced her at every visit with forced warmth. "My sister," she would say, grasping Anastasia's hands tightly, "you must forgive me if I ever seemed distant. I only wanted the best for you." Anastasia would nod silently, though inside her chest ached with the memory of her isolation. Brianna, too, became overly attentive, bringing soups and home remedies for a mother's strength. Anastasia accepted them politely, but when alone with Abraham, she sighed heavily. "They think I've forgotten," she murmured. Abraham brushed a hand across her cheek. "Their treatment has changed because of Nathaniel, but Anna, you are still the same woman who endured without them. Hold your peace. Let their conscience trouble them, not your heart." She breathed deeply, realizing that though their hands now reached for her, their love was shallow and stained with guilt. The shift extended beyond words to actions. Invitations poured in for her to host family events, as though including her name on the banner erased years of rejection. At a birthday celebration for Abel's son, Rosalie made a point of placing Anastasia beside Oscar at the head of the table, declaring loudly, "No one holds the family together like her." Anastasia felt the sting of hypocrisy, but she sat with poise, Nathaniel cradled in her arms, his innocent cooing silencing every pretentious word. Later that night, Abraham found her standing at the balcony, gazing into the distance. "Does it comfort you?" he asked gently. She turned slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It doesn't comfort me," she replied, "but it reminds me that God's vindication is louder than their cruelty. Their tongues wounded me, but their actions now prove they were wrong." Abraham pulled her into his embrace, whispering, "And this is only the beginning. Nathaniel will not only change how they see you, he will change everything about this family's legacy." Anastasia closed her eyes, holding on to the promise that their son's life would become the truest answer. Nathaniel's childhood unfolded like a tapestry woven with both intelligence and compassion. By the time he was 5, he was already reading passages far beyond his age, his curious eyes scanning words with an eagerness that astounded his teachers. "He asks questions even I cannot answer," one instructor confessed to Anastasia after school. "This boy carries a mind touched by God." Anastasia's heart swelled, her hands trembling as she thanked the teacher. At home, Nathaniel would sit at Abraham's study table, drawing diagrams of the human body from a picture book. "Why do people get sick, Papa?" he asked one evening, his brow furrowed. Abraham smiled softly, ruffling his hair. "So that others may learn to heal them, son. And maybe one day you will be one of those who bring healing." Nathaniel's eyes lit up with determination. "Then I will make people better. I will make sure no one feels pain like Mama once felt." Anastasia, overhearing from the doorway, pressed her hand to her chest as tears welled up, knowing their son carried not only intelligence, but also empathy. As he grew older, his character distinguished him further from his cousins. While other children flaunted wealth in flashy toys and arrogant gestures, Nathaniel shared what he had, offering his pencils and books to classmates who lacked them. Rosalie noticed during a school visit and whispered to Brianna, "He has a strange humility for a child of privilege." Brianna smirked. "It is his mother's doing. Anastasia has raised him differently." Yet they could not deny that wherever Nathaniel went, admiration followed. At a family gathering, while the other children squabbled over who would cut the cake, Nathaniel calmly waited until everyone else had eaten before taking his slice. Oscar, observing quietly, leaned toward Rosalie and muttered, "The boy carries dignity beyond his years." Rosalie looked startled, but said nothing. That night, Anastasia tucked Nathaniel into bed, whispering, "Never let their world change your heart, my son. Stay kind, stay true." Nathaniel smiled sleepily. "I promise, Mama, I'll make you proud." As she kissed his forehead, she realized he already had. Oscar, who had once openly declared Anastasia a curse, now found himself conflicted each time he looked at Nathaniel. Though his pride would not allow him to voice it, admiration stirred in his chest as he watched the boy grow. One afternoon, he observed Nathaniel carefully correcting his cousin's arithmetic at a family lesson, his tone patient and encouraging. "No, not like that," Nathaniel said gently. "Try again and you'll see it's easier." The cousin smiled in relief when he got it right, while Nathaniel clapped lightly in celebration. Oscar turned away quickly, but not before Abraham noticed the faint softening in his father's expression. Later that evening, Abraham confronted him. "You see him, don't you? You see what God has done." Oscar's face tightened. "The boy is bright, yes, but do not mistake talent for destiny." Abraham shook his head. "It's more than talent, Father. It is purpose, and you know it." Oscar said nothing, but his silence was an admission louder than words. Despite his unspoken pride, Oscar struggled with guilt that haunted his sleep. At night, he paced the halls of his estate, remembering the harsh words he had thrown like stones at Anastasia. He recalled the day he named her a curse, and how Nathaniel's laughter now echoed through the same walls where her tears had once fallen. During family dinners, he often found himself staring at Anastasia, watching her cradle the child with tenderness, and in those moments, shame gripped him. Yet when others were present, he maintained his mask of authority, praising Nathaniel indirectly without ever acknowledging the woman who bore him. One night, while sitting alone in his study, he whispered into the empty room, "I was wrong." His voice broke as he covered his face with trembling hands. But when dawn came, the old pride clothed him again, and though his eyes softened when they met Nathaniel's, his lips refused to confess. Anastasia, however, knew. She could read it in the way he lingered by the boy's side, the way his hand rested lightly on Nathaniel's shoulder before withdrawing. His silence was his confession, even if his words never came. Nathaniel's passion for learning deepened with age, and by his teenage years, he declared openly his desire to study medicine. "I want to be a doctor," he told his parents one evening, his voice filled with certainty. Anastasia exchanged a tender glance with Abraham, tears brimming in her eyes. "Why medicine, my son?" she asked softly. Nathaniel leaned forward, his eyes shining. "Because I want to fix what is broken. I want to help people the way you both helped me find who I am." Abraham clasped his shoulder firmly. "Then we will walk with you every step." Anastasia hugged him tightly, whispering into his ear, "You will be the answer to prayers we didn't even know how to pray." From that day forward, Nathaniel poured his energy into his studies, spending nights reading medical journals while his friends played games. His determination inspired even his teachers, who marveled at his discipline. The decision soon became the talk of the family. Rosalie raised an eyebrow when she heard. "Medicine? That's a long, difficult road. Wouldn't law or business be better for our name?" Brianna added, "Doctors work long hours. Why burden himself when he could inherit the estate?" Abraham silenced them with a calm but firm voice. "This is his calling, not your convenience." Oscar listened quietly, saying nothing, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of reluctant respect. That evening, Anastasia found Nathaniel studying in the dim light of his lamp. "Are you sure, Nathaniel?" she asked, brushing his hair back. He looked up at her, determination etched into his features. "Yes, Mama, I was born for this." She kissed his forehead, her heart swelling with pride. As he bent back over his books, Anastasia whispered a prayer of gratitude, realizing their son's journey would not only fulfill his dreams, but also heal wounds deeper than he could ever imagine. As Nathaniel's achievements multiplied, Anastasia often found herself reflecting on the years of pain that had preceded his birth. One afternoon, while folding his freshly laundered clothes, she paused, holding one of his neatly pressed shirts against her chest. Memories of nights spent crying into her pillow resurfaced, the humiliation of whispered insults, the sting of being called barren, the crushing words of being labeled a curse. Now, as she looked around at the life God had given her, she wept, not from sorrow, but from overwhelming gratitude. "Lord," she whispered through tears, "thank you for turning my ashes into beauty. Thank you for making me a mother when they said it was impossible." Abraham entered quietly, finding her with tears streaming down her face. He wrapped his arms around her. "Why are you crying?" he asked softly. She smiled through her tears. "Because I can't believe I get to love him after everything." Abraham kissed her forehead gently. "Anna, you earned every joy. Do not forget that." Nathaniel himself began to notice the depth of his mother's emotions. One evening, while they walked together in the garden, he turned to her and said, "Mama, why do you look at me like I'm more than your son?" She paused, her throat tightening as she searched for words. "Because you are, Nathaniel," she said quietly. "You are the answer to years of prayer. You are proof that God listens, even when the world mocks." Nathaniel took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Then I promise, Mama, I'll live in a way that makes all those prayers worth it." Anastasia pulled him into an embrace, sobbing softly into his shoulder. In that moment, she realized the weight she had carried for so long had turned into wings. Every wound had birthed a blessing, and every scar had become a testimony. Her heart overflowed with gratitude, for the child who was once mocked as impossible had become her greatest joy. Years later, after long nights of study and countless exams, Nathaniel graduated as a doctor, his name already echoing with promise. He furthered his training abroad, where his brilliance earned him accolades and recognition. Newspapers wrote of him as the young man with healing hands, and conferences invited him to speak, his insights lauded by seasoned physicians. Anastasia followed his journey from home, her heart swelling with pride each time she saw his picture on a screen. Abraham often clasped her hand during such moments, whispering, "Our son has become a light to nations." At last, Nathaniel returned home, not as a boy, but as Dr. Nathaniel Oscar, his reputation preceding him. The airport was crowded with well-wishers, some of whom had once dismissed his parents, but now clamored to shake his hand. Anastasia stood at the edge of the crowd, tears slipping down her cheeks as she whispered, "Welcome home, my son." The family gathered that evening, their words dripping with praise. Rosalie hugged him tightly, declaring, "We always knew you were destined for greatness." Brianna smiled wide, presenting him with expensive gifts. Nathaniel, though polite, noticed the insincerity in their eyes, but he said nothing. Oscar, now older and slower, sat quietly at the head of the table, watching his grandson with an expression caught between pride and regret. "You have done well," he said finally, his voice trembling slightly. "You carry the family name with honor." Anastasia listened silently, her mind replaying the years when that same man had spat venom at her. Later that night, Nathaniel sat with his parents in their living room. "I owe everything to you both," he said softly. Abraham clasped his shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "No, Nathaniel. We owe everything to God. You are his gift to us." Anastasia rested her head against her son's arm, whispering, "And to think they once called me a curse. Now the world calls you a blessing." One evening, the unexpected happened. Oscar, while presiding over a family gathering, suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorting with pain before collapsing to the floor. Panic erupted. Rosalie screamed. Brianna rushed for water, and Abel shouted for someone to call an ambulance. Abraham pushed through the chaos, kneeling beside his father. "Stay with me, Papa," he cried, his voice desperate. Oscar's breathing was shallow, his skin clammy. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and sobbing voices. Anastasia held Rosalie's trembling hand as they followed in another car, her mind torn between past wounds and present urgency. At the hospital, the family paced anxiously, their arrogance stripped away, their faces etched with fear. Hours felt like years until a nurse emerged, asking for the family of Oscar. "He's in critical condition," she said solemnly. "We need to act quickly." The family clung to one another, weeping openly. "Will he survive?" Rosalie asked, her voice trembling. The nurse replied, "That depends on the surgeon on duty." The words hung in the air like prophecy. Anastasia closed her eyes, her heart pounding. She thought of all the words Oscar had spoken against her, yet here they were, powerless, waiting for a miracle. "God," she whispered under her breath, "what are you about to do?" As the family gathered in the waiting room, each of them suddenly realized that life, with all its wealth and pride, could collapse in a single moment. And they were left vulnerable, begging for mercy from hands they could not see. The doors swung open, and Nathaniel walked in, wearing his white coat, his stethoscope around his neck, and a calm authority in his stride. The family froze, their eyes wide with shock. Rosalie gasped audibly. "Nathaniel?" Brianna whispered, disbelief thick in her voice. Abraham stood taller, his chest swelling with pride as he murmured, "God's hand has orchestrated this moment." Anastasia's heart raced as tears filled her eyes. Nathaniel looked around at the stunned faces, then spoke with professional calm. "I am the surgeon on duty. Your father's life is in my hands." Oscar, pale and weak on the hospital bed, turned his head slowly toward his grandson. His lips quivered, his eyes filling with tears. "You," he whispered, his voice breaking. Nathaniel stepped closer, placing a steady hand on his grandfather's chest. "Yes, me, the child you once called cursed." The family remained in stunned silence as Nathaniel continued. "But tonight, none of that matters. I am here to heal, not to condemn." Oscar began to sob weakly, reaching for his grandson's hand. "Forgive me," he whispered, his voice trembling with regret. Nathaniel squeezed his hand gently. "Save your strength, grandfather. We will speak after." He turned to the medical team, his demeanor shifting instantly to that of a leader. "Prepare him for surgery. Time is critical." As the doors closed behind him, the family broke down in tears. Rosalie fell to her knees, wailing, while Brianna covered her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief. Anastasia clutched Abraham's arm, whispering, "God has brought our story full circle." In that moment, the weight of years of mockery and pain melted into awe, for the very child once despised now stood as the instrument of salvation for the man who had rejected him. Hours later, the surgery was declared successful. Nathaniel emerged, his face calm but tired. "He will recover," he said simply, and the family burst into relieved sobs. When Oscar awoke, weak and pale, his eyes searched until they found Anastasia. He reached out with trembling fingers. "Daughter," he rasped, his voice heavy with shame, "I wronged you. I cursed you when you were my blessing all along. Forgive me." Tears streamed down Anastasia's face as she stepped closer. "It is not my forgiveness you need," she whispered softly. "It is God's, but I will not carry hatred in my heart. I forgive you." Oscar wept openly, the once proud patriarch reduced to a broken man humbled by truth. Nathaniel stepped to the bedside, and Oscar gripped his hand tightly. "My grandson, forgive your foolish grandfather. You are the light I never deserved." Nathaniel's voice was steady, though his eyes glistened. "I forgive you. But remember, it was the mother you despised who raised me into who I am today." The room grew silent as Oscar sobbed harder, covering his face with his frail hands. Rosalie and Brianna fell to their knees beside the bed, crying, "We are sorry, Anastasia. We are sorry for everything." Anastasia stood still, her tears falling freely, not from pain, but from the overwhelming weight of vindication. Abraham held her hand, whispering, "The Lord has made our enemies our footstool." The family wept together, but for Anastasia, the tears no longer carried sorrow, they carried release. Years of humiliation had turned into a testimony that no one could deny. As she gazed at her son standing strong beside her, she knew that the circle had finally closed. The man who once silenced her had been forced to acknowledge her worth, and the family that once mocked her now bowed their heads in shame. Days later, after Oscar was discharged, a convoy of cars pulled up outside Anastasia and Abraham's home. Relatives poured out, their clothes immaculate, but their eyes heavy with remorse. One by one, they walked to the gate and knelt on the ground, pleading for forgiveness. Rosalie clutched Anastasia's hands tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sister, please forgive us," she cried. "We called you barren, we mocked you, yet God lifted you higher than we ever imagined." Brianna fell at her feet, sobbing. "I taunted you, but today I beg at your gate. Forgive me for my cruelty." Anastasia stood silently, her heart overwhelmed. Abraham placed his arm around her shoulders, whispering, "This is the day the Lord promised. He has lifted you above their mockery." Nathanael stood tall beside his mother, his presence radiating strength and compassion. Oscar himself, now frail and humbled, approached slowly with the aid of a cane. He lowered himself to his knees, despite his weakness. "Daughter," he said brokenly, "accept my shame. I once called you a curse, but now I beg for your blessing." Anastasia's eyes filled with tears as she lifted her hands toward heaven. "God has vindicated me," she declared, her voice trembling. "You mocked me at this gate, and now you kneel here asking for mercy. I hold no grudge, for my God has turned my tears into testimony." The family wept openly, their pride shattered, their arrogance stripped away. Abraham kissed his wife's forehead, whispering, "You endured, and God has rewarded your endurance." With Nathanael's arm around her, Anastasia turned and walked back into her house, her dignity restored. The gates that once bore her shame now stood as monuments of her triumph, and those who once despised her could only bow in awe. Here's the Bible verse for the story. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. 1 Samuel 2 verse 8 moral of the story: true worth is not defined by human judgment but by God's design. Anastasia's journey shows that when men label someone as worthless or cursed, they only reveal the limits of their vision. God alone decides who to lift and when to lift them, and his elevation silences every voice of mockery. The moral is that no season of pain is permanent. Faith and perseverance turn disgrace into dignity, and in the end, God's vindication is louder than man's condemnation. Heavenly Father, we thank you for showing us that you are the God who turns shame into honor and tears into testimony. Just as you lifted Anastasia from mockery to dignity, may you lift us in our times of waiting and remind us that our worth comes from you alone. Teach us to endure with faith, forgive with grace, and trust that in your perfect time, every pain will be turned into victory. In Jesus' mighty name we pray, amen. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.